Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Singapore Centre for Character and Citizenship Education Forum Series 2025. My name is Chin Leng and I'm a host for today. As part of our forum series, we are happy to have with us experts on social emotional learning and character development from the US, Professor Maurice Elias, who is accompanied by Dr. Ed Dunkelblau. Today's seminar will proceed in the following format. We will first have Professor Maurice Elias share with us on the topic of cultivating social emotional competencies, values, and purpose in schools. We will then follow with about 20 minutes of Q&A, where Dr. Ed Dunkelblau will join us. Without further ado, let us begin. Allow me to introduce our speaker, Professor Maurice Elias. Professor Maurice Elias is a professor of psychology at Rutgers University in New Jersey, USA. He is also the director of the Rutgers Social, Emotional, and Character Development Lab, co-director of the Academy for SEL in Schools, which offers online certificates in SEL instruction and school leadership. Professor Maurice Elias received many lifetime awards in SEL, including the Joseph E. Zients Memorial Senior Scholar Award for Social Emotional Learning from Castle, the Sanford McDonald Award for Lifetime Achievement in Character Education. He has written many books for educators and parents, most recently, Reinvigorating Classroom Climate, Everyday Strategies to Inspire Teachers and Students, A Leader's Guide to Building Social Emotional Skills and Character in Schools, Morning Classroom Conversations, as well as Students Taking Action Together. For parents, he has written Emotionally Intelligent Parenting, Talking Treasure, as well as The Joys and Joys of Parenting. Professor Maurice Elias last shared with the educational fraternity at the Teachers Conference and Excel Fest in 2019. We are extremely delighted and honored to have him with us again today. Please join me in welcoming him. Over to you, Maurice.
Thank you so much, Chin Lang. It is a great pleasure to be able to speak with you and to share some work that I've done in the schools that has evolved over 4 decades. And I'd like you to think of today as a conversation starter that will be talking about many things, but the most important thing is that you take back what we talk about to your colleagues who are not here and continue and deepen the conversation about the work that we're going to be sharing. And so I'm going to share my screen. And talk about cultivating social emotional competencies, values, and purpose in schools. And I'd like to begin by giving you the headline, and that is that the impact of CCE and social and emotional character development work that we do on students turns out to be related to students' sense of purpose and mattering. And that's going to be the focus of our conversation today. So my first question for you is, how do you know that you matter? And I'd like you to think about this question in breakout rooms. And we're going to have you talk for about 3 or 4 minutes. And when you come back, please put into the chat box one way that you know that you matter. Okay, I'm going to put you into those groups right now. All right, as you're coming back, please do put into the chat box one way that you know you matter. All right, can see some of the contributions coming in. When my students need me, I know I matter when my voice is heard. When people miss me, it's very good. When someone listens intently to me. when my presence is acknowledged, like when your comment in the chat box is read out loud to everybody. I'm invited to and included in various settings. My contribution is that this is perfect. This is perfect. And it's so important that we identify these things because we need to know that we matter. Here are some other things that I want you to reflect on. We're not going to go into breakouts, but I'd like you to reflect on these things. When and with whom am I at my best? When and with whom am I at my worst? What are my best abilities? What motivates me? What are my best sources of help? In other words, it's important to be able to reflect on ourselves realistically so that we can understand the extent to which we matter. And then we have to also realize that there's got to be a connection between the answers that we give and how we act. And let's go into that a little bit more. How do I see myself? How do I think others see me? How do I see others? How do I want others to see me? How do peers influence me? What do I want others to believe is my purpose in life? Again, these are questions that deserve longer conversations, longer reflections, especially this last one. What do I want others to believe is my purpose in life? Because that bridges to the question of how would they know? How would they know, other than by what they see, what your purpose in life might be? So we need to understand that everybody in a school benefits from reflecting upon questions like these, especially students who are experiencing disconnection, failure, and discouragement. And so this leads into the next question. How do your students know they matter, especially when they're in school? The thesis here is that if we don't believe we matter, then it's very difficult to imagine why we would want to engage in deep learning. And so for our students, they come into our classrooms, they come into our schools, and they want to know they matter. They want to know they have some significance. And all the different things that you suggested in the chat apply fully to the students. And so, for example, we help our students develop their social identities by communicating to them which identities matter, which identities are welcomed in the school community. That's why a sense of inclusiveness is such an important value for a school. And it also includes how subject area content is presented. Do students see themselves in the content area that they're learning? And of course, schools also influence staff perspectives on mattering. And I would like to extend the thesis that when you teach character and citizenship education, you matter tremendously. You are opening doorways to a positive future for your students, for the work that your students are going to do in communities, and for the way in which those communities are going to shape the country. So when it comes to mattering, the teaching of character and citizenship education is more than just a little bit of importance. And if the curriculum in a school doesn't highlight people with certain identities, students may not feel that those identities matter at the societal level. So we want schools to be places where kids feel they matter in a positive way. And even if outside of school, students may be getting messages about the fact that they might not matter, those can be countered by powerful, consistent messages over time that they do in fact matter. And this reflects our knowledge from research of how students can truly succeed. And we understand that academic success involves the integration of kids' intellectual, emotional, social facets of learning, that there's no way to disconnect them. And so kids' social and emotional learning is an inherent part of what they're going to learn academically. And that's why we begin with the idea that our kids must experience positive, character building, inclusive school climates, that we have to set that up for them. And then upon that, we can bring in explicit instruction in social and emotional competencies. And then we have to recognize that we're in a new era, that habits of mind that may have been less important in the past are extremely important now. And this includes things like curiosity, helpful skepticism, explaining, reasoning, giving and getting feedback, asking good questions, not just answering questions, and being a good problem solver. These are superordinate competencies that kids need because we want them to matter in their classrooms, in their workplaces, in their leisure activities, and in their communities. So I've used the term social, emotional, and character development a couple of times. I want to just clarify that when we talk about skills, they're very important. It's skills that propel us forward in life. But skills do not give us direction. Direction comes from our virtues, our values, our character. Just as if we have virtues, values, and character, a rudder, but we have no means of propelling ourselves forward, we are not going to accomplish much in life. The journey of life requires both skills and virtues. And that's why we talk about social, emotional, and character development. But equally important is that this journey has to be going someplace, and that is positive purpose. We need our kids to identify with a sense of positive purpose toward which their skills and their values can take them. And the nature of the journey is going to depend on how the seas are, and that's the school climate. If the school climate is poor, even the best boat is not going to have a successful voyage. So social, emotional, and character development basically points to the fact that we need our kids to be working toward positive purpose and giving them the skills and values to help those outcomes to happen. Social, emotional, character development is our advanced way of talking about SEL. Now, if we're looking at this, what should be familiar slide, you think about what it is that we want to be the output of education in Singapore. A confident person, a concerned citizen, a self-directed learner, an active contributor. How are we going to get there? Through civic liberty, literacy, global awareness, cross-cultural skills, critical and inventive thinking, etc. All of that is based on the three big ideas of identity, relationships, and choices. But I would submit to you that within that first area, identity, is where we get to the key issue of mattering. If kids are not able to see themselves as mattering, these other attributes are not going to become solidified and part of their own personal dispositions. The core values that we want our kids to develop: respect, responsibility, resilience, integrity, care, and harmony. Those values are extremely powerful, but they have to be believed in. They have to be identified with, and they have to be vehicles for students to feel that they can make a positive difference in their classroom and in the lives of others around them. So what does this mean in practical terms? And these are things that I think have direct translation into your classrooms. And some of these things are things that were mentioned by you in the chat as ways you know that you matter, that you matter. People, adults and children, need to be seen and heard. That's not simple when you have classrooms of 40 students. But opportunities for pair share, small group interaction, writing and sharing, we have to be willing to exercise those options to make sure that children are seen and heard individually to some extent. People also need to be in a place of sharing, mutual helping, and support. That our classrooms and schools need to provide a climate of comfort and respect. That this is the conditions under which we thrive. That people need to contribute. From our youngest students to our high school graduates, they need opportunities to contribute. And they also need to be reassured and have optimistic future-mindedness. We need to be communicating to our students our belief about their potency, their agency, and the fact that they are going to have positive future accomplishments. And then another corollary is that people need to receive and give caring, kindness, help, and appreciation. It's one thing to receive it. That certainly is one way of feeling as if you matter. But equally powerful is being the agent of caring, kindness, help, and appreciation. And so both of those things are essential. We don't want people to only be on the receiving end or the giving end. They need to all be on both ends. And finally, that people need to be understood with empathy and compassion. Now, this is something that I learned from working with students during COVID, that they would show up in my classes, often on Zoom at Rutgers University, and they had extraordinary things going on in their lives that I didn't learn about until I gave them some writing assignments that gave them the opportunity to share with me. And of course, there are some students that never shared with me. And so it gave me a special appreciation of the fact that many of us are in trauma. Many of us are dealing with strong emotions and worries, and that we need to be treating our kids in the classroom as if that's true for them, even if we're not sure. Because that extra kindness that we bestow is going to pay dividends to both us and the children in the long run. So now I'm going to ask you to do one more breakout, and I'm going to ask you to take a look at this statement. People, adults and children, would rather pursue a negative purpose than have no purpose if they don't perceive a positive purpose. All right, so let me say that again. If people don't have a positive purpose, the statement is saying that they would rather pursue a negative purpose than have no purpose. Do you agree? Yes, you agree. No, you disagree. Maybe you're not sure. So take another moment, decide on your perspective, yes, no, or maybe. And then we're going to put you into breakouts with one other person. And please share your own perspective and the reason for your opinion. Again, people would rather pursue a negative purpose than have no purpose if they don't have a positive purpose. We'll see you back in 2 minutes. Welcome back. And please put into the chat box your response. Did you agree, disagree, not sure, yes, no, maybe? We'd like to get a sense of what the prevailing opinions happen to be. We have a couple of yeses coming in. Yeah. Some maybes. So some interesting work was done in this area by a colleague, Seymour Rosenberg, and another colleague, Michael Gara. And I can summarize their research by asking you if you ever have heard of or use the term a class clown. If you know from a class clown, that's a student in your class that doesn't mind being the butt of negative attention, and in fact, almost seems to thrive on drawing negative attention from other students. And in the research that they did, they found that the state of being in which people have the greatest difficulty, including mental health problems, are when they do not have a sense of purpose. And that having a negative purpose is indeed preferable to having no purpose. This doesn't mean that you have a single purpose and you stay with it, but over the course of time, and again, some good work has been done looking at kids in middle schools, that they change their purpose with some frequency. But if you track their behavior, you will see that their behavior is at their worst when they don't have that sense of purpose. And when they get a sense of purpose, even though it may be temporary, their behavior gets back on track. So this is a very, very important understanding for all of us. The fact that we need to have that sense of purpose. Viktor Frankl, who studied the behavior of people in concentration camps during the Holocaust, found that mattering and purpose were deeply connected. And William Damon talked about the fact that noble purpose or positive purpose is a stable and generalized attention to accomplish something that is at once meaningful to the self and of positive consequence to the world beyond the self. This raises for us the challenge of whether we can be igniters of our children's purpose for positive character, contribution, compassion, and citizenship. This is the noble work of education, quite honestly. This is probably why many of you went into education. It's to indeed ignite these great potentials in our students. And this has been talked about in many, many different ways. In biblical terms, we are called to higher purpose of spreading righteousness and justice in the world. Viktor Frankl said it did not really matter what we expected from life, but rather what life expected of us. And that purpose is when our skills and our interests are joined with the world's needs, whether it's small or large, local or global. This is why we strive to help kids understand what it means to have a sense of purpose and encourage them to develop their sense of positive purpose. And of course, this connects to mattering. President John Kennedy of the United States said that I am certain after the dust of centuries have passed over our cities, we too will be remembered not for victories or defeats in battle or in politics, but for our contribution to the human spirit. Right? This is a reaffirmation of the dignity that is within each and every child and in each and every one of our educational staff. Hillel said, "That which is hateful to you, do not do to another." Again, reminding ourselves that we are embedded in a network of human dignity. And this dignity needs to be preserved. As people feel their dignity is preserved and they matter, they can then be free to pursue a positive purpose. You know, one of the sayings that we have in our work is that we spend often too much time trying to fix kids and not enough time trying to inspire kids. And so this is the phrase, inspiration precedes remediation. That if we want to improve our kids, we have to recognize the critical importance, especially in adolescence, of inspiring them. That adolescents are asking big questions. They're asking about their sense of purpose. They're trying to understand the gifts they have, the connections they have, the fears they have. And so by connecting to purpose and meaning, we can prevent many problem behaviors that result as adolescents look for that sense of purpose and search for that inspiration. Mark Twain said the two most important days of your life are the day you were born and the day you know why. That's one of my favorite quotes. I think it's so aptly true. So again, what does it mean pragmatically? Particularly for our kids in the secondary level, we need to be asking them about these 5, what we call vital signs of youth well-being and inspiration. We need to be asking them about contentment and joy, how they experience joy and satisfaction in their lives. We need to be asking them about hope, to what extent they look ahead in their lives with optimism, positive expectation. We need to also tap into their feeling of awe, not awe as fear, but awe as a sense of wonder, amazement, astonishment, the bigger picture of things in life. We need to ask them about positive meaning and purpose in life. And finally, deep connection. When do you have a sense that you're connected to something or someone bigger than yourself? Give some examples. So these are things that are easily blended into writing assignments, but they also can be portrayed using other forms, music, art, sculpture. But the key thing is that they're not just internal conversations of a given student, that these become things that are shared. As students learn from each other about all 5 of these areas, they begin to draw a sense of inspiration. They begin to broaden their consideration of what life can be, of what can be meaningful. And this is what we're striving toward. Related is to give kids a sense of individual and collective responsibility through reflective journaling. This can happen in language arts, counseling, health, physical education, different places you can locate it. But it's the idea of asking students to reflect on 2 or 3 goals to make themselves better as people, better character, make their classroom, group, or team better, make their school or program better, make the wider community and world better. Now, in my experience, when kids are first asked to do this, they can think about some ways of making themselves better. They're improving their personal life. It gets a little harder for them to think about ways they can make their classroom or group better. It's very hard for them to think about how they can make their school program better. And even harder still is how they can make the wider community and world better. But this is the direction in which we want to have our kids thinking. Because right now, it's so much about the first one, making myself better. And yet, the other 3 are about making the world around you better, literally by mattering to others. So these are academically appropriate activities that can be blended into things that you're already doing. But it's the topic of the reflective journaling that has its potency. We've also found that it's not just a simple matter of teaching kids about purpose, that there are ways of bringing them into this process. And the first thing is to have them look at the positive purpose or goals of a well-known individual, be it picture books, fiction, biography, social studies, current events. It's about asking the language of purpose. What was this person's purpose? What were this person's goals? You can do this even with children's books. You can ask young children what the goals of a character are, and they can begin to identify that. And that's the first level, getting kids familiar with the language of purpose and goals. The next level is to have kids explore the positive purpose of a personally known individual. We've had schools where local heroes have come in and talked about how they found their purpose, community leaders, clergy, first responders, family members. In other words, kids going home and talking to family members about what they think their sense of purpose is, and educators. I worked with one middle school, 1,500 students, and teachers basically set up a spot in their classroom, and students walked in an organized way around the entire school, stopping at each teacher and talking about the teacher's sense of positive purpose. It was like a giant carousel. It was so community building and so inspiring for students to hear about the positive purpose of people that they respect so much, i.e., their teachers. It also gave them a different window into the educators in the building than they typically get. And then they can start to think about their own positive purpose and begin to develop writing and other activities related to that. But we have to work our way into that before getting our kids to do those activities. In language arts, the topic of purpose can fit into this kind of a framework where students are asked to write about a personal experience where they did something that made a difference, i.e., mattered. Describe how these experiences help give you a sense of purpose and how will you continue working toward this sense of purpose. So this is an activity that easily can fit into a language arts assignment based on your existing language arts curriculum. And here are some other question prompts that can help students think deeply and write, or in other ways express their own values, principles, and their connection with others. Who do you admire? List 3 of that person's admirable qualities. Who has been most important in your life in helping you to establish your values? Please explain. Now let me skip down to, well, let's go to the next one. What are the 3 most important values you think it would be important to encourage in your children one day? That's a fascinating question to see the kids' answers to that. And finally, what is the one rule you believe it is important to live your life by? So let me share with you an 8th grader's essay in response to that question. So this student identified perseverance as a law by which he wants to live his life. And think about how SEL, social emotional skills and character, combine as we take a look at what this student said. The key to success in my life is perseverance. My purpose is to continue to reach my goals despite difficulties that I may face. My great-grandmother was a person who struggled to make sure her family would be successful. Born in 1902, she was a maid who worked extremely hard just to make ends meet. She walked miles to get to work because she didn't have money for transportation. After working in someone's kitchen all day, she came home to take in laundry. Her driving desire to make life better for her children and theirs motivated her to persevere in a time when being Black meant you were considered less than nothing. This is an essay that was published in a book called Urban Dreams, Stories of Hope, Resilience, and Character. If you have some thoughts or reactions to this, please do put them into the chat box. Well, let me give a little more context to this. The students were asked to write the essays about this law of life, in this case, perseverance. But they weren't asked to do so in isolation. They were also asked to go home and talk to their families about what was important as a defining way of living their lives. And that's how this student learned about the story about his great-grandmother. And this was such a powerful story. But this writing that you're seeing in front of you was not the student's sole individual project. Students would draft their essays and share them with their classmates. Their classmates would give them input. The idea was to make every essay great. Why? Because every essay was expressing a deep truth on the part of students, and students were motivated to help each other get these essays well. And then students were invited to deliver these essays to other classes so that they would develop the communication skills to go along with these writing, emotion, and conceptual skills. So this seemingly little essay was the result of a number of processes that activated and built many social, emotional, and character skills and gave students windows, meaningful windows, into their lives of their families. So that's the power of some of this work. It looks deceptively simple, but it's the process that makes it work the way it does. Service is another key element. And when we talk about character and citizenship education, service is in the mix. You know, there is an American saying, live and let live. And Bill Moyers, writing in his book on democracy, said, it's time that America change its narrative from live and let live to live and help live. Just think about the implications of that, right? Live and help live. That's our motto. It's not about being independent. It's about being interdependent. And Ehrlich and others believe that the best mechanism to convey mattering and purpose is service learning. And service learning creates a feeling of making a difference. It could be in the lives of one other person, a group, an organization, the civic life in one's community. Service learning is an organized way of making a difference. And what does this lead to? The research shows that it leads to more and more individuals who are willing to see the moral and civic dimensions of issues, to make and justify informed moral and civic judgments, and to take action when appropriate. Service learning can be especially important to reconnect students who feel marginalized, which is a benefit both for those students and for the wider society. Now, these outcomes are not outcomes that happen as a result of service you do in 1 year or 2 years. This is the result of going through an educational system that provides numerous sequenced opportunities to engage in this. And that's what leads people to be able to see the moral and civic dimensions of issues, to know how to talk about difficult issues, to learn how to give and take opinions. Service learning brings people in contact with those different from themselves, and that leads them to develop skills to live with people different than themselves. The path to positive mental health involves acting with caring for others' benefit. Albert Schweitzer said, one thing I know, the only ones among you who will be really happy are those who will have sought and found how to serve. And Martin Luther King Jr. said, everyone can be great because everyone can serve. Well, you know, there's something behind this that's very important. And this goes back to what we said earlier about how inspiration needs to precede remediation. So in some of the work that we've been doing, we have been trying to operationalize this by recognizing that for many children, what's missing in their lives is being a source of contribution, feeling as if they matter. And a lot of negative behavior is in misguided pursuit of trying to find that source of admiration and feeling that they matter. So as we give kids more opportunities to make contributions, we are going to find that their mental health is going to improve. Giving to others despite our own difficulties is healing. Now, let me give you an example of what we've done. So we talk about tier 1 and tier 2 interventions. Tier 1 are interventions that are universally given to an entire school. Tier 2 innovations are given to kids that are having some signs of difficulty. So one of the things that we've been doing is trying to operationalize this philosophy. Here's an example. We had a group of students in middle school who had significant anger control problems, and they were going to be slated to go into an anger management group. I don't know if you've ever run an anger management group, but I have run anger management groups. And my feeling is that they left me angry and unhappy and not feeling very good about what was going on. So we took these kids, and instead of putting them in an anger management group, we told them, you are going to be the newspaper club. You are going to develop a newspaper for this middle school that really tells what's going on in this middle school. We don't have anything like that, and you're going to do that. But before you do that, let's have a conversation about what skills you need to be a good newspaper reporter. And so we asked the kids what skills they think they need. Why don't you put into the chat box the skills that you think the kids might have mentioned that are important to being a good reporter? Let's see what we get. Observation, listening, listen well, empathy, asking good questions, right? Commitment to telling the truth. So sensitivity, so perspective taking. So basically what you're defining are all the skills that we would want the kids to develop in an anger management group. But instead of putting it in a remediative context, we put it in an inspirational context. We gave the kids something to do that helped them matter. So we told the kids that before they go out and engage in their newspaper activity, we're going to spend a couple of weeks developing these competencies to help them be better at their newspaper work. Another one of the competencies that no one mentioned yet is, especially for these kids with anger management problems, is that it's not a good idea to hit your interviewee. That it ruins rapport between you and the interviewee if you smack them. So all the skills that we would be developing in a remediative context, we put into a service learning context. And this sequence of things, where the kids engage in preparation, understanding what's going to happen, then they take the actions of going out and doing the work, then they reflect on what they've learned and how they felt and all the issues involved. And then they demonstrate by showing others what they did. And then formal evaluation is to evaluate what they thought they got out of it and what others thought they got out of it, and then celebrate their accomplishment. You can see this framing is very different than a remediation framing, but it takes a service learning structure and uses it to teach skills that are necessary. The reference to GLOW is for Girls Leading Outward. This was a group of extremely behaviorally challenged girls, and they were basically told that they were nominated to work on a community project and do a project out in the community. And again, they were told, before you go out into the community and do a project, what are the skills that you think you might need? And they came up with the same list of things that we otherwise would have dealt with in a remediative context. And so on and so forth, right? It's a question of orientation. How do we reframe things into a positive, constructive, contributing frame that students find much more engaging? Now, did all the kids buy into this? No, of course not. There were some kids that had a hard time with this. And that's true all the time. But instead of 10 kids in the anger management group building and seething their anger, 8 of those kids thrived in the newspaper club. 2 kids needed a lot more specialized work and help than they would have gotten from the anger management group. So you're not losing anything, but you're gaining a lot when you shift to a more service-oriented, contribution-oriented framework. Here are some other strategies that you can think about for getting your kids to be more positively engaged in meaningful activities that give them a reason to matter. For example, meaningful participatory student government. So I worked in 6 middle schools where every advisory had elected ambassadors, male and female ambassadors. Those ambassadors would talk to their advisory group about issues in the school and bring them up to the student council. The student council would talk about them and then transmit them back to the ambassadors. The ambassadors would then talk to their advisory about it. And so there was this two-way process flow from the officers of student government all the way down to each individual student. Meaningful, participatory student government just doesn't involve a few kids running things. It involves all the kids having input. Staff student committee involvement. This can take different forms, but what I've seen to be most feasible is an anti-bullying committee made up of students that informs the anti-bullying committee made up of adults. Similarly with anti-gang, anti-drug, anti-cheating, any issue that the school is dealing with, the students will typically have excellent ideas for how to deal with it because they don't like the problem any more than anybody else. So getting students involved in committees for the improvement of the school gives opening for kids to feel a sense of purpose. Buddying, mentoring, and tutoring across age and ability. We don't use that anywhere near enough. But each of those things gives students a tremendous opportunity and a sense of purpose. There are kids who will tell you, if you ask them, and I've asked them, what are you happy about going to school today? I'm happy because I'm going to see my mentee. This is a kid with reading difficulties who's going to read to a kindergarten student. And during the hour he's working with that kindergarten student, he feels fantastic because he can read better than that kindergarten student. And the kindergarten student is thrilled that an older student cares enough to spend time with them. So it is a win-win to have buddies, mentors, and tutors. Open forums for school problem solving. I work with a principal, his name was Tony Bensavenga. He had a middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. Every marking period, we have 4 marking periods in the United States. Every marking period, he would gather all of his 6th graders together and he would say to them, I want you to tell me what I and you can do together to make this school a better place. And he started that conversation when the kids were 6th graders and the kids thought he had 4 heads. They didn't even know what he was talking about. But he would bring all the kids together in the 2nd marking period in the 6th grade, the 3rd marking period. By that time, the kids started to dialogue. They started to see that he was interested in what they were saying. And there were conversations and actions. And so then when the kids got to be 7th and 8th graders, these were open forums for school problem solving. We had just about every student in the school having input on how to make the school a better place. Opportunities for reflection and feedback. You know, we get surveys now for everything that we do, but we rarely give kids little feedback surveys about the unit of study they just engaged in. What did you think of that reading? What did you think of these lessons? What did you think of this assignment? We have found in our work that kids cherish the opportunity to get to give feedback about what's going on. And a lot of times the feedback that they give has valuable instructional implications. We had one activity that we designed for kids in a social emotional curriculum, the development of a family crest. And the kids would develop a crest and it would have all kinds of values and history and whatever. We thought it was a fantastic assignment and we worked on it. And the kids dutifully did it. And then we asked for feedback about the various lessons of a given unit. And 3/4 of the kids hated the CREST lesson. Well, we would never have known that if we didn't ask them. And the CREST lesson was gone, right? I mean, what's the point of giving kids a lesson that is so hated? They did it and probably would have continued to do it, but it wasn't appropriate. And the last bullet point is just something broader to think about. Helping your school to become recognized as a character and citizenship education exemplar school. I'll just tantalize you a little bit with that concept. But students like to go to a school that's recognized for something positive. They like the idea of attending a school of meaning. I went to schools when I was growing up in New York City that had numbers. I went to PS 214. I went to PS 77. I went to junior high school 185. When I finally went to a school that had a name, the name was Flushing High School. And, this was not a source of inspiration for me in any way. Kids like the idea of going to schools that have names of people, and then they live and absorb the values of those people and those names. All right. I think we are just about at our question time. And I'm going to be joined by my colleague, Dr. Ed Dunkelblau. And once we get him in.
All right, thank you so much, Professor Maurice Elias. Indeed, thank you so much for the insightful sharing that talks about how we can infuse content of purpose and mattering into our work, and also to reframe the context. For example, by using service learning and some of the inspirational activities, and also with the eventual purpose of higher contribution. We'll now move on to the Q&A segment. So let us welcome Dr. Ed Dunkelblau, and allow me to just give him a little introduce him formally, right? So Dr. Ed Dunkelblau is an internationally renowned speaker and consultant on the topics of social emotional education and on the application of humor and laughter in educational and clinical settings. He has 2 master's degrees from Columbia University and a PhD from the University of Kansas School of Education. He has served as a practice consultant to CASEL and on the Character.org Blue Ribbon panel selecting national schools of character. He was also the lead developer of the Kansas State Standards for Social, Emotional, and Character Development, and he presently serves as the International Coordinator for the Academy of SEL in Schools. Finally, Dr. Dunkelblau is the author of the Social, Emotional, and Character Quick Reference Guide and has helped develop numerous SEL programs in the US, Canada, Asia, and Europe. He is widely sought out as a consultant to schools on SEL implementation. So I think it's up there, and we can begin with the Q&A. So you may either use the Q&A function right below at the button, or you may maybe use the react button, right, or raise hand function if you have a question and you would like to ask directly. Okay, I think we do have a first question by Kevin from SOTA. Kevin has written in the chat. All right, I think I'll just read out very quickly. He says that culture is strategy for breakfast, but how much of culture building is top down? What kinds of mindsets and behaviors do we need to see from leaders? What about bottoms up? Can we support organic culture building?
Well, I think it's a both and. I think that the leaders set the tone. I think the leaders convey the big moral message. And so I think when the leaders are not on board, it becomes more difficult. This does depend in part on the nature of the leader. I've worked in some schools where some leaders are not opposed they're just not especially interested. And in those schools, the bottom-up approach has been very powerful because it's created an important initiative that the leader doesn't have to invent, but simply has to reinforce. So I think the question raises the very important issue of the staff administration dynamics, which underlies all this. Ed, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that well, a couple of things. I okay, the first thing is I think I should go off of mute. For once, we realized that when we were looking at schools of what makes for a sustainable culture, what makes for a sustainable program, and we found that the involvement of leadership was absolutely necessary if we hope to have a sustainable culture. It doesn't mean that the leader had to be the leader of the initiative, but they had to be involved. They had to actually be a part of the planning and implementation. We also found that a lot of schools were relying on the student body to establish and maintain the culture. And that was problematic because the student body was only in the building for a limited number of years, whereas the staff would be consistent in the system and would establish the culture much more effectively and consistently. So I think that culture is determined by language, by identity, as you were talking about earlier. And so there has to be a concerted effort to explicitly state what the expectations, values, and hopes are for any particular school or school system.
Okay, perhaps.
Just want to go, there was a question before Kevin's question about the number of facilitators for the newspaper club. And the answer to that question is that there was one facilitator for the newspaper club. That would have been the person that would have run the anger management group. So instead of running the anger management group, the person ran the newspaper club. So that's the way that worked.
Okay, and I think Elaine has a question.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, professors, for really your time here. I'm coming from a curriculum angle. I'm from the curriculum branch, looking after humanities education, in particular social studies education, and we also work very closely, with the character and citizenship education branch in MOE. My question is, based on the research that you have done, does curriculum that is centrally developed make a difference in terms of developing students with that sense of purpose? I ask that because I'm wondering whether it needs to be centralized within a subject area, or is it better if the learning experiences are integrated across subject areas? However, my question is asked knowing the limitations in what curriculum can or cannot do, because definitely in nurturing students with that sense of purpose, the adults in their lives in school and the relationships that are developed between the teachers and the students are so instrumental. So I guess I would like to appreciate hearing your views about the place of curriculum and what research has shown in this particular area. Thank you so much.
Well, I think research has unfortunately not shown a tremendous amount in this area. And in part, it's because of what you implied, and that is that there are so many ways of doing this that they have not yet been systematically, experimentally studied. So I can certainly tell you from my experience, I've seen it done well in different ways. One example is the idea, and this was implied when I was talking about the development of this concept of purpose, that in the elementary years, it's the language of purpose that gets introduced to the students, not with the idea of having them master the concept, but for them to just become familiar with it as a way of thinking about people. Once students get into middle school, there, I think, is a time for that term to be discussed and for them to come to some understanding about it, and then for it to be reinforced across different subject areas. I mean, for example, one of the most interesting things is how little students know about the backstory of so many of the figures that they study. They read authors and know very little about them. They study math, but know very little about the mathematicians. They study science, but know very little about the scientists. And so purpose is a way of going behind the scenes to the backstory and understanding more about the context of what's being learned. So I definitely see room to elaborate on the concept and value of purpose without it having to be a sort of a big extracurricular activity.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with everything you've just said. I imagine so many of the schools that I've encountered in the United States mostly teach social emotional learning and things like purpose in a discrete, specific way, perhaps 10 minutes a day or 1 hour a week, without any other integration. And it's almost, if you could imagine teaching reading that way, that we only taught reading for 1 hour a week and that none of the other subjects involved or required any reading capabilities or support. We couldn't imagine that. And this is at least as important as that. And so looking at what is it we want to have the students understand and learn and implement, what's the language that we want them to use that we hope is developmentally appropriate and additive as they go through the system. And then finally, what sorts of things do we want to support and encourage in every single subject that they're exposed to? So that requires every faculty member to understand what's being done, what the language is, what the culture supports, and then look at their curriculum and integrate it into whatever it is they're teaching.
Thank you very much, Profs. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can move on to Li Jing's question.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think, people can see it in the chat, have taken a look at it. It's interesting. I mean, for the first part of the question, um, I think almost everything we do, there's someone else that could do it. And it doesn't matter, so to speak. If you're the one doing it, then it matters. The fact that someone else could do it also is interesting, technically. If the other person starts to do it, then they matter, and then you can go matter somewhere else. So it's not a zero-sum game, I don't think. And I think it's actually humbling to realize that a lot of what we do, someone else could do. And we should be very grateful for the privilege that we have in being able to do it. And that therefore put our very best into it. The second question, my mother-in-law had Alzheimer's for about 11 years. And especially during the last years, there was tremendous deterioration, maybe a little bit like what your question is describing, not exactly in a coma, but some kind of equivalent of a coma. So the question is, did she have anything to contribute? And the answer was absolutely yes. She had a tremendous amount to contribute. She had to contribute by the fact that she was with us, by the fact that she had spread love to the family for her, the vast bulk of her life, the fact that she was meaningful to us, and we talked to her about it, we shared with her about it. Whether she fully understood it is a question mark, but that didn't keep us from communicating it. And I think the framing of contribution, at least to me, still works. My mother-in-law was a contributor to the life of our family right up until the moment she passed, and quite frankly, she still is. So I don't see a limitation in that way.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with knowing your mother-in-law. I would absolutely agree with that at many levels, and how your family rallied around her. As you were talking, I was thinking about that scene from The Wizard of Oz, where I think it's the Tin Man that receives his heart, and he says, "You measure heart not by how much you love, but how much you're loved by others." So I think there's an internal purpose, and then there's a purpose that one receives by their impact on the people around them.
Okay, how about Masha? Masha, would you like to
Hi.
unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Junling, and thanks, Prof, for spending the afternoon with us. My name is Marsha. I'm going back to school next year to, work with secondary school students again. I see I totally understand what y'all are trying to convey to us about the importance of mattering, and especially helping our students recognize how they matter in schools, and that is also about how we convey to them that they matter to us in school. But I think for us, for in our Asian context, mattering is often linked to achievement. You matter if you achieve something, right? You matter if you can do something well. You matter if you meet some standards. And I personally would like to unlink those things, right? You don't only matter if you achieve something. But it's difficult because, like many people have said, culture, context, and everything. So do you have any advice or best practices from your research as to how we might unlink mattering from achievement? Thank you.
Right. Right. Well, this does go back to the question of values and what the school espouses its values to be. But I'll also say that the values of the school do not inherently have to mimic the values of the wider culture. And so for the days that a student is in school, there can be a wider definition of mattering. I work with a school in an urban area where kids hated the school day, but loved the after-school program and would be absent. They would cut the entire school day, and they would come to school at 3:30 to be in the after-school program because they loved it so much. And why did they love it so much? Because it had a different philosophy, a different approach, and they felt that they were valued there, and they didn't feel that they were valued during the rest of the school day. So I think that you can decouple those things, or maybe not decouple, maybe the better way of thinking it is supplement. What in the school, communicating that message. The other part of this is, though, that mattering is a social phenomenon. It's something that we define. And so as we think about the broader implications of character and citizenship education, the opening up of opportunities to be a caring, helpful, supportive person to others, you introduce other contexts of mattering that become very powerful. And they don't have to exist in opposition to academics, but an alternate pathway for mattering. It goes a little bit back to the work that we were talking about earlier on purpose, the idea that if kids can't have a positive purpose, they'll get a negative purpose. But the corollary to that is they may not have a fantastic positive purpose, but they'll take an okay positive purpose. And I'd rather they do that than take a negative purpose. So as we expand our definition of what matters, we open up entry points for more kids in a positive way.
And related to the question as well, I think that by having alternatives for mattering, say at school versus the larger culture, I think one thing you can do, and depending on the age of the child, certainly, is to open up the conversation and ask the student, what do you think about that? What is this all that goes into mattering? Or does interpersonal relationships help you to feel that you matter? And to really begin to invite them to be curious, invite them to ask questions. They're certainly getting a lot of input from social media about what's important and what constitutes someone mattering. And I would venture to say if we had a survey right now, most of the messages they're getting from social media would not be the ones that people on this call would value and support. So I think there's really benefit to inviting a conversation, inviting a discussion to help the student reflect, think about, and be curious about what alternatives exist.
Thank you. Thank you for suggesting that we can broaden the definition of mattering. Okay, there's a question by Hanif. So it's a question about the Kraftwerk's taxonomy and how it is linked to mattering.
So I just put into the chat a book that just came out called The Handbook of Significance and Mattering.
Meaning,
If I was going to try to answer your question, that's the place I would go to find an answer. So I would suggest, if you want an answer to that question, which I can't give you for sure, that's the place to go.
Okay. All right. I think Vera has a question. Given that teenagers are an age where their peers seeing them matters more than adults seeing them, how do we as teachers balance being too over involved in the process and finding inroads to talk to them?
I guess I would want a little clarification of what too over involved in the process might look like. I'm not quite sure what that means.
Vera, would you like to unmute and elaborate? Or
Hi, yeah. I'm Vera. Thank you for picking up my question. By being too over-involved, I think I mean planning a lot of activities and things to get them to do a lot of mattering or purposing activities and not giving them the space to explore it on their own with their peers. Yeah. Thank you.
For me, it's a question of guidance versus direction. I think that the presence of guardrails on a road is very helpful, but grooves in the road that don't allow for any kind of variance are problematic. So I think that the adults have to make the determination about how much guidance to provide while still giving some leeway for students to pursue their own interests and passions and to some degree make their own mistakes.
And I would just add my own feeling that peers don't matter more than adults to adolescents. I think adults matter a lot to adolescents. I think what has happened in our society is that we spend much less time with kids, that parents are very busy, too busy. A lot of times it happens to be a developmental convergence of where parents are in their career track and where the adolescents are in their development, so that just at a time when adolescents would benefit from parents being most available and connected, parents are most unavailable and disconnected. And so, of course, adolescents turn to peers, et cetera, et cetera. But I wouldn't discount the tremendous value that adults have to peers. And quite honestly, I think anybody that's teaching secondary school kids, secondary level kids, knows how much their approval, their interest matters to those kids tremendously.
Okay, we have a question asking about whether the students develop a sense of entitlement when we focus too much on mattering on themselves versus service to others.
Yeah, I think that we've been putting this mattering in a contributory frame. And that is pretty much how I would see it. And especially when you think about character and citizenship education, you want to keep it in that contributory frame. I do think, again, well, everything runs a risk of being taken to the extreme. Just as there was an issue with the self-esteem movement, as that got pushed too far, one can imagine that the baseless attribution of how much you matter to a child, you matter so much, could also not be helpful. I think these things need to be grounded in actions and not so much in generalities.
Okay, are there any other questions? Maybe we can take one or two more questions. Okay, as I speak, there's one question. All right, any wisdom or considerations on purpose development as students transit from primary to secondary or post-primary, so across the developmental stages?
I think, as we alluded to before, and in my own experience, that the concept of purpose, goals, as applied to people, is something that can be woven into elementary education. But when we get into middle school and beyond, that's where kids need a more explicit discussion of purpose and more activities designed to help them develop their sense of purpose. By middle school, for sure, by 7th grade, kids should be writing essays that begin to articulate their own sense of purpose. But I just want to reinforce the idea that, as opposed to previous sort of philosophies about this purpose becomes a shared conversation in the classroom as students hear about one another's sense of purpose and work to shape the expression of that purpose better. And what I've seen, which is interesting, is that kids at some point begin to talk to one another about acting according to their sense of purpose. And so I want to be clear about the fact that from this conceptualization, the development of purpose is a sort of a communal activity. It's helping the individual develop it, but it's also helping to bring purpose into a shared language and shared focus. I've had teachers who looked at kids' purpose essays say that they were like an X-ray into the soul of the child, that they had no idea of what some of those kids had. I mean, just think about that perseverance essay that I read earlier. The teacher who got that essay back had no idea of the connection of that child back to the great grandmother, and that closing line of how it when it meant nothing to be Black. The teacher just would never have imagined the student being able to articulate that. So I think this is the value of this, especially as we get into the secondary level and up.
Yeah, I invite everyone who's watching, everyone who's listening, to reflect for a moment on your sense of purpose. Ask yourself the question, why do I do what I do? Why do I believe what I believe? And how do I implement what I believe into action? And as you reflect on that and reflect on whatever gratitude comes out of that, appreciation, and the desire to have an impact on the world around you, that gives you a better sense of what each of your students can enjoy as they clarify their sense of purpose.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Maurice, Elias, and Dr. Ed Dunkerblau. I think, yeah, for me, it sounds like even though purpose and mentoring can be such big abstract topics, but conversations can happen one at a time, and reflections can happen a small piece at a time. With that, I really thank you for your time, and especially for the audience as well, to have be engaged in all the questions. And yeah, time has fly past quite quickly. It's now 4 p.m. Thank you very much for your presence and engagement today. We hope you had an enjoyable session, enriching one filled with mentoring and purpose. And we hope to see you again and catch you again in our sessions coming up. Right. Thank you so much and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.